A snappy, brassy, and unforgettable woman, she swept into Ann Romano's life. Plus, it didn't take long for everything to break. The conflict between Mary Louise Wilson and Bonnie Franklin was more than simply an on-screen squabble. Aimlessness, insecurity, and the price of comedy were all laid bare. You won't believe why she disappeared after 14 episodes unless you stick around. She burst onto the set like a tempest nobody could have predicted. The role of Ginny, played by Mary Louise Wilson, was to bring new life to the show day by day. The show's creators were looking to add another fearless and clever character to spice things up, especially with Bonnie Franklin leading the way as Ann Romano. Ginny lacked remorse and was bold and self-assured. An unmarried lady in her 40s who, like and before her, is bringing the same passion to life's challenges. From the outside, it appeared to be a seamless match. Actually, it was the spark that set off a fire that nobody could turn away from. Initially, there was sincere enthusiasm. Wilson, who had previously achieved great success on stage, offered Broadway credentials and comic chops. An unremarkable line could be transformed into something electrifying by her crisp delivery. In the back of the camera, though, rumors circulated that she was drawing too much attention to herself and not only ruining the ensemble. Bonnie Franklin was already struggling under the burden of a successful show, so that type of energy was not welcome. The power dynamic changed almost the moment Ginny was introduced to the audience in 1976. At the story's center, Ann Romano now had to share screen time with someone who wasn't afraid to devour every scene. A split formed among the critics. Many praised Ginny for her refreshing candor and thought she was hilarious. Some viewers felt the character damaged the show's emotional core by making serious scenes into overblown farces. Even more split was the reaction backstage. Later on, Wilson acknowledged that it wasn't easy to break into the sitcom industry. She felt out of place in a system that was already highly efficient. Wilson inherited a powerful, authoritative, and larger-than-life style from live theater. In contrast, Franklin flourished in the television format. That was both her strength and her weakness. It made her distinctive. Everything hinged on the cast's chemistry, and as soon as Ginny showed up, things began to fall apart. Minor issues that had been simmering behind the scenes started to boil over as Ginny became a regular fixture. When the rest of the cast sensed the tension, the once harmonious set became an elaborate balancing act. Overshadowing Franklin, who was said to be very possessive of her job and show, was something she took very personally. The producers began to wonder if introducing Ginny was a mistake. The storm that was building behind the scenes was unknown to the outside world in those early episodes. Unaware that she would vanish without a trace within months, they were merely witnessing a fresh face attempting to make her impression. However, ratings and writing weren't the only factors that contributed to that demise. It was about two people whose egos would collide in a way that would hurt them both. However, the initial indications of that conflict became readily apparent shortly after. There was instant chemistry when Mary Louise Wilson joined the ensemble. However, it was not the kind that produced excellent television. There was no explosive outburst of animosity between her and Bonnie Franklin. Simmering it was. Absolute silence reigns on set. Debates that were more icy by the conclusion than when they started. Clever power movements that made it clear that something was amiss. The film star was Bonnie Franklin. The focus of One Day at a Time was on Ann Romano. Her fights, her autonomy, her platform. There was more to Franklin than meets the eye. The anchor was she. Everything was upset when Wilson showed up as Ginny and her dramatic energy took over. As a result of the director's notes, Wilson's lines would sometimes land in unexpected places. It was too large, too brazen, and stole the show. That was more than simply a character flaw for Franklin. A personal invasion of territory was how it felt. The staff was quick to notice. Rumor had it that Franklin had a very possessive attitude toward her position. Rehearsal was apparently when she would voice her preferences, and she would often get irritated when Wilson relied too much on her Broadway instincts or improvised. After some time had passed, Wilson admitted that she often felt judged, exclaiming that she felt like a total stranger in that setting, unable to decipher the sitcom language. Rumor has it that the show's creators had high hopes for Franklin and Wilson's humorous chemistry, envisioning two powerful women who could complement and enhance each other's strengths. However, conflict arose instead. Franklin appeared to tighten her hold on the spotlight whenever Wilson indulged her humorous impulses. It wasn't merely about lines for Franklin. The show's identity was at stake. Even the rest of the actors took note. There seems to have been a change in atmosphere on site, even if nobody publicly stated their stance. A subtle competition began to emerge from what had previously felt like cooperation. Franklin's composure prevented a public scandal, but many on the inside later acknowledged the obvious atmosphere. At the same time, Wilson began to take the tension inside. During interviews, she confessed that she felt unheard and that her jokes weren't connecting. How ironic. She made me laugh. However, the show's intentions were not fulfilled. Franklin was uninterested in mincing her delivery to accommodate Wilson, and the rhythm of the sitcom was at odds with her theater training. As the programs aired, viewers witnessed a character who exuded confidence and fearlessness. Behind the scenes, there was a power struggle that they were blind to. Conflict was high in the air by the time Ginny was put into narratives. Screaming matches and dramatic exits weren't part of it. Two women's unwavering resistance builds gradually. The more the strain, the more obvious it became. Eventually, one of them would give out. However, the true shock arrived when the audience's response intensified the situation. The plot twists dramatically at this point. Even though Bonnie Franklin and Mary Louise Wilson were fighting like tigers behind the scenes, Ginny wasn't exactly getting a rousing welcome from the home audience either. To be more precise, reactions to Wilson's portrayal were uneven. Audiences expecting to hear about Ann Romano's genuine problems were instead met with Ginny's boisterous, nearly irritating enthusiasm. Many saw her as an exciting new face who defied expectations for women in comedy and brought something new to the table. To others, she appeared to upset the delicate equilibrium. For Wilson, the most perilous thing was this disconnection. She was involved in an altercation with Franklin behind the scenes, challenging oneself to simply stay alive inside the show's beat. The audience that ultimately decided the fate of the characters, however, were giving her a cold shoulder. You can pull through one of those fights while you're on TV. However, both? In any capacity, that would be disastrous. Wilson later admitted that she felt unnoticed and that she wondered if anyone in the audience or on set could possibly get her sense of humor. She came right out and said that her self-esteem took a nosedive once the giggles dried up. Her statement made me feel queasy since it implied that no one found me humorous. Angry phrases that revealed how much she felt alone. At the same time, Franklin appeared more resolute than before in his efforts to preserve the rhythm of day by day. The show had become dependable, genuine, and even tender under her guidance. Franklin was not going to tolerate Ginny's hedonistic lifestyle, which he saw as a threat to their relationship. With each indifferent review and audience shrug, her conviction that Ginny didn't fit in was more cemented. But for the uninitiated, it was merely another season. In sitcoms, characters must come and go, don't they? Close observers, however, might detect the beginnings of fissures. It seems like episodes involving Ginny were louder and less balanced. Every time Ginny swooped in, she took the spotlight off of and her daughter's relationship, which was the show's central theme. Even while they didn't boo her, audiences didn't warmly welcome her either. Hollywood considers apathy to be even more evil than hatred. The writing was on the wall by the time Ginny's arc reached halfway. Wilson was lonely. As Franklin's frustration level rose, producers noticed a decline in the numbers. A sacrifice was inevitable. However, it didn't unravel in a subtle manner. On a personal level, even now, people are haunted by the words Wilson used to describe what happened. A veil was lifted when Mary Louise Wilson disclosed her experiences on One Day at a Time. She didn't tell how horrible it had been until many later, in interviews and her memoir. She was quite blunt about it. It was never a welcoming environment for Wilson on that shoot, she said. Rehearsals, she said, were like walking into an invisible wall. It was as if the whole group had already decided she didn't belong. Most devastating strike? No one thought I was funny, she said, as a result of which my colon shrank. Those lines conveyed a vivid image of a lady suffocating from rejection and an actor finding her groove. She was remarkably forthright. Wilson became famous on Broadway, where her live performances of humor wowed audiences. While performing, she exuded an air of self-assurance, charisma, and grandeur. To the contrary, she felt helpless in the sitcom industry, where chemistry and timing are paramount. It felt like she had been whisked away to a strange land where she had no idea how to communicate. Bonnie Franklin, on the other hand, showed zero interest in assisting her with the translation. Wilson recollected the frigid air that had been with her from the very beginning. Her co-star didn't appear to get any of her comedic attempts or the theatrical instincts she brought to the role. She implied that Franklin's signals were picked up by the crew. It was safe to assume that no one was laughing if the show's headliner wasn't. That loneliness hurt more than any evaluation from critics could have. However, the surprising part comes next. Wilson insisted that she was eliminated, not only ignored. The writers started to lessen Ginny's role in the show by cutting her lines and scripts. A fierce and comical sidekick soon became just a background character. It wasn't a coincidence, in her opinion. The show's trajectory was subtly shaped by Franklin's influence. Every slashed line seemed to have a message for Wilson. This is not the place for you. The more illuminating were her observations on the mechanics of comedy. It was her confession. Sitcoms were all about playing it safe. In contrast to the risk-taking actors of the theater, Wilson despised the structure of the rhythms, which were mechanical and meant to elicit laughter from an audience in real time. She said it was more like a machine that stifled her imagination than an inspiration. She drew attention to a taboo subject by being brutally honest about it. The mental and emotional toll that actors who didn't conform could take on in sitcoms. Wilson was referring to more than simply a negative encounter at work. She was shedding light on the unwritten norms of television, the covert power structures, and the vicious methods in which celebrities defended their territory. Despite her suffering, Wilson refrained from publicly slamming Franklin. She never came out and said it directly. Nonetheless, the undertone was unmistakable. Franklin served as the barrier, and Wilson's chances of winning were always slim. What hurt Wilson's revelations the most, though, was the fact that the figures weren't fibbing. In fact, they strengthened Franklin's argument. You can't trust ratings when it comes to television. It's a business. Small but concerning drops in one day at a time's ratings started appearing as the weeks progressed. And Romano's single mom plotline, with all its attractiveness, had been the show's driving force. Something about its rhythm seemed off when Ginny was introduced. Some people thought it was unfair. Unlike with Ann's issues, viewers didn't appear to care about Ginny's. The comedic elements were present, but the emotional core was absent. This was the ideal weaponry for Bonnie Franklin. There was indisputable evidence that Ginny was ineffective with each mediocre review and rating fall. The pressure began to mount on the producers. A person's chemistry is not a game that television executives play. What is already winning is safeguarded. Franklin stole the show. Every week, viewers tuned in because of the visage on the magazine cover. For them, Wilson was nothing more than a failed experiment. Confidential discussions became increasingly contentious. In order to give Ann and her daughters more storylines, the writers were advised to reduce Ginny's involvement. Ginny was no longer a genuine co-star. By the time viewers paid attention, she had already been reduced to cameos and eccentric interruptions. What started out as a powerful supporting character became a plot point that the producers were eager to get rid of. However, the truth was more complex. Wilson wasn't merely a ratings byproduct. Conflicting goals befell her. Executives want unity. Franklin wished to defend her territory, leaving Wilson smack dab in the midst. Cut Ginny loose instead of trying to make her better. The team went with the easy way out. Wilson came clean about her ability to sense it unfolding in the flesh later on. Reduced comedic timing, fewer lines, and shorter appearances. It became more apparent with each writing that she was losing her shine. Decisions were being made in rooms where she was not invited, no matter how much she attempted to adjust. When Ginny vanished, the crowd didn't go into a riot. Quite a few didn't even bat an eye. And that lack of sound conveyed a lot. Executives saw it as proof of Franklin's long-held beliefs. Ginny had no purpose. She made the show better. But the official version was still rather nebulous. Franklin did not publicly criticize her co-star, and producers never made an announcement about a termination. No one paid any attention to Ginny's departure, and it remained a mystery for decades. However, those on the inside were aware that ratings weren't the only factor. It was this question that remained. Was Wilson's departure a conscious decision, or did she feel gently pushed aside? Where the story takes its darkest turn is in answering this question, which depends on who you ask. After only 14 episodes, Ginny vanished from one day at a time without a single press statement stating why. Her plot was untied by a touching parting episode. She had just vanished. Decades of conjecture were nourished by the lack of response. Was the overwhelming strain the reason Mary Louise Wilson decided to leave? Was Bonnie Franklin's power behind the scenes strong enough to force her out? There was a troubling lack of specificity in the official story. Later in life, Wilson would say that she didn't really quit, but that she felt she had no other option. Her significance had been progressively diminished till she could no longer be felt. Long before she departed, the decision was apparently already made for her. As the number of lines in each script decreased, it was as if a door was shutting behind her. No one needed to utter a word because she was already out by the time it was over. Next, we have Franklin's position, or more accurately, his lack thereof. Bonnie Franklin refrained from publicly discussing the conflict. She refrained from discussing Wilson in interviews and made no mention of removing anyone from the program. And Romano and her daughters were the center of attention to her. All other considerations were secondary. However, sources close to the project indicated that Franklin had significant input into artistic choices. She had the power to ensure that Ginny did not remain if she thought Ginny was destroying the show's essence. Reportedly, some crew members thought Wilson wasn't suited for television in any way. They murmured that she was an actress who had become stuck in the rut of sitcom timing. It wasn't Franklin's ego that they saw as the issue. The capacity to adjust was lacking in Wilson. Others, meanwhile, argued that Franklin's icy demeanor rendered adaptation an impossibility. How can you stand on your own 2 feet if your co-star isn't behind you? What makes Ginny's disappearance so intriguing is the hazy boundary between choice and shove. She was never actually given a chance, according to Wilson. No one ever accused Franklin of being the puppet master. The creators, though? Whatever the case may be, they gained subtly from the decision since the show became more consistent once Ginny left. And what was the outcome? The 2 ladies each took their truth with them as they left. The wounds of shame and exclusion were visible on Wilson's body. Franklin preserved her program and her authority unquestioned. For years, Hollywood rumor mills speculated about who had made the final decision. However, Ginny's departure is just the beginning. The events that followed exposed Bonnie Franklin's hidden desires to the world and the indelible mark this conflict left on television history. Even when Ginny disappeared for a few days at a time, the program continued uninterrupted. The series continued with Ann Romano at its center, since viewers soon failed to notice the presence of any other roommates. However, the wounds from the Franklin-Wilson clash never quite healed in the shadows of that stillness. Mary Louise Wilson was never truly gone from the entertainment industry. When she got back on Broadway, she finally discovered the success that made her realize she belonged there. The theater was happy to have her back, and she went on to win a Tony. Still, the specter of performing one day at a time followed her on stage, no matter how high she flew. Decades later, in interviews, she continued to discuss the incident with an edge that revealed how profoundly it had impacted her self-assurance. Feeling erased is a pain that never really goes away. This was not the case for Bonnie Franklin. Her legacy as Ann Romano was solidified as she continued to lead day by day for years. Even without Ginny, the performance was nevertheless a smashing success, and Franklin was its unofficial ambassador. Her resiliency and strength served as an example to the whole population. Her reputation as a challenging co-star, however, persisted in murmurs behind closed doors. Some praised her for being unyielding in her pursuit of what she thought was best for the show. For some, it was an act of egotism on the part of the celebrity, who was clearly not willing to share the spotlight. Much confusion surrounds the actual events that transpired between Franklin and Wilson. Was Franklin cold-bloodedly trying to get Ginny out of there? Or was Wilson just an outcast? Somebody who was never meant to be a part of the sitcom industry? There is no clear response in the official record. The narrative that remains is molded by anecdotes, hearsay, and conjecture. Perhaps that is the reason for its eerie atmosphere. In a room too cramped for any of them to flourish, two strong, capable women met. Someone managed to leave the concert unharmed. While one was hurt, the other was able to come back from the brink. Their feud became one of those long-lost Hollywood stories that has been quietly simmering for decades. Because Ginny's departure was about more than just a sitcom character going away. It dealt with the consequences of a collision of egos, power, and insecurity in the television spotlight. Remembering the lesson is just as terrifying as it was back then. If you want to make it in Hollywood, you usually have to hurt someone else. Mary Louise Wilson was the one who footed the bill in this instance.